What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today it's time for part 2 of some excellent jump spots, lines of sight, and other hidden spots that I found on many of the maps in Black Ops 6. Keep in mind, I've already done an episode sharing some of my favorite spots. Obviously I wanted to cover those first, but in today's video we're going to be diving into some of the other maps and showing some key spots that I feel you should be aware of if you aren't already. And also, just as a disclaimer here, some of these spots may seem very obvious to some people that have been playing for a long time, but I try to make this series accessible to players of all skill levels and experience levels with the game, so some may be more obvious than others, but I'm willing to bet for the vast majority of you watching this video, you're going to learn a few new spots today that you didn't know about previously. And starting it off on Babylon, I've got a couple excellent spots for you guys here. The first one is if you find yourself up here and enemies manage to get to that piece of cover right there, they actually have the advantage. Despite the fact that you have the height on them, they have way better cover than you, so if you can get yourself to the left here, or to their left, your right, and you get cover on them here, I've got a pretty much guaranteed way to kill these people every single time, and that is to simply come outside of the map here, loop yourself around, and bam. Really easy kill on them. They'll have no idea what hit them, because they're looking over here. They're not looking up here for you. Now, it is worth noting you can do the reverse of this, but it's just not as practical. I can't think of too many situations where you'd want to come around like this, since there's just not nearly as much utility there, and you're really exposing yourself in the first place just jumping across there, and if somebody's up here, they're just going to kill you before you manage to get around that corner. Now, on a similar note, something a little bit less practical, but I wanted to show off that you can do this anyway. When the enemies are spawning in this area, you can push right up into their spawn, depending on game mode, of course. But instead of just standing here and trying to pick them off, just for fun, I sometimes like doing this route here. You can jump from here, and once again, we can jump outside of the map, loop around, and shoot some people right here. It's, again, not going to be the most practical spot in the game, just something I wanted to point out that you can do. Now, speaking of being spawn trapped in this back corner, if you are trapped really bad and you want to come out in this direction, but the enemies are up there and they're just locking this down, just pre-aiming it, if you have a sniper rifle, you can actually back up right here and just hit a jump shot on them. That's very possible. Or maybe you just want to spawn in and check to see, is anybody watching that angle before actually pushing out and exposing yourself to them? It is a nice little check spot there as well. Next up, just a little thing I wanted to point out. Instead of coming up on top of this area right here to challenge those people across the way, that's basically a 50-50 fight. If you have this side of the map under control, that's a big if, but if you do, you're better off jumping up onto this area here, and you have much more control over how much of your body you're exposing, and this is more of a head glitch where you're going to win that gunfight a lot more often. But again, you don't want to be lingering here, and you really got to make sure this side of the map is covered. And then finally for Babylon, a spot that a lot of people already know about, but I've had a lot of people asking, how do I get up there? You can get up to this area right here by simply jumping across like that. And from here, you can kind of lock down there or this area here. You are fairly limited, and lingering up there typically won't yield like a ton of kills for you, especially once people realize you're up there. But it's just a spot that I wanted to point out. And if you want to save yourself a mantle on that, you can actually just come onto this area here and just jump across like that. And it's just a little more efficient. Next up, let's get into Derelict. And if you find yourself on this side of the map and the enemies are really locking you down from their power position over there in the window, and you just can't seem to challenge them from any of the usual angles, something you can do to really easily pick them off with a sniper rifle is simply come all the way back to this area right here, and there you go. Excellent angle on them. You'll be able to pick them off no problem here, and they're not typically looking back this far. You're also fairly well protected from most of the other angles, so you can usually pick this off with a lot of confidence. Next up, just in case you guys weren't aware, with these trains, you can use these ladders to get on top. Obviously, you're super exposed up here, but I've found in many situations, it's really important to be able to get onto these trains really quickly, just for a quick jump spot. Like this one, for instance, I love using here to jump across like this through this area. It's a really nice way to access that. Obviously, the situation has to be just right, but you can do that, and it's just nice to know what's available to you and what sort of options you have at any given moment with these ladders. Next up, I'm sure most of you guys are aware of the fact that you can jump up on this wall, and that's often just a great way to get over that wall or get around that corner without exposing your entire body in the obvious spot. However, instead of doing it this way, like I just did, that takes a really long time to get your gun up after you perform that mantle, so it's actually much better to go on this rock first. You can even jump and do a quick check first to see if somebody's there, and then from here, you have a much faster mantle. You get your gun back up and in the fight way, way faster. And once you are on this wall, I also just wanted to point out, you have a lot of options available to you. While you can't mantle on any of these areas with that barbed wire there, once you're on the wall, you can walk on this, no problem. And this is great for getting up to that top floor of the building there. And you can often use this to your advantage if you have the enemy spawning back there. It just is a great way to get up here, and now you have the height advantage over these people and a nice little flank. Then if the enemies are spawning back in that area there and you are approaching to the bottom floor of this building, which is also a domination point, if you jump up here, you get a really nice line of sight on these people and you can easily pick these guys off here as well. That one's very obvious, but more importantly, if you have enemies that are coming through this area, instead of trying to like strafe your way around here, exposing most of your body, you can actually just kind of jump up onto this little broken wall right here. And it gives you a decent line of sight over top of this. And that's just much, much better cover than standing out in the open. Now, I also want to point out, this one may seem obvious, but just in case you weren't aware, you can very easily just jump to this rooftop here, which is very handy to know if you want to be challenging people around these corners. Now, another thing to point out, an excellent long shot spot, like if you really want to get some long shots here, instead of standing this area here to challenge that power position, this is the most common spot people will come to, and you're really exposing yourself to a lot of the map in doing that. Something you can do with a really accurate gun or like a sniper rifle, for instance, is just come all the way back to this area here and climb yourself up on the wall. And from here, you get a nice little angle on those people across the way. Or if you want to get more extreme with it, you can come all the way back to this area here, mantle up like that, and there you go. You can pick those people off really easily from here. And this also gives you a bit of a line of sight toward the B domination point there. Sometimes you have people just sitting on that piece of cover or in that train car there. Next up, let's get into extraction. And the first thing I wanted to talk about is if you're approaching this area here and you want to challenge people that are in the bus or on that piece of cover, of course, you could do that from here. You don't have the greatest cover here. It's basically a 50-50 fight. Or you can come to the spot where they're going to be pre-aiming and expecting you, which is right here. Or my favorite spot to use here that you do have to be careful with is you can jump onto this part here, strafe yourself over, and you can use this as cover. And they're just not typically going to be looking up here. However, just be very aware these rotors will kill you. So if you go a little too far forward and you stand up, that will get you killed. And from the other direction, we have another spot we can use here as well. Obviously, they'll be expecting you to be right here if they're watching this general area. So what you can do is get onto the nose of the helicopter and just have a look over this area here. That gives you much better cover, and they're not typically going to be looking right up here for you. So that'll give you this slight edge over them as well. Next, it's very common for people to be camping up in that air traffic control tower, just chilling behind that piece of cover right there with like a sniper rifle or just an accurate gun. And if you are coming out of this spawn area and you want to challenge them, if you jump up to this area here, make sure you crouch before you come around the corner so you're not exposing much of yourself. And you can just slowly peek around this and look at that. You have excellent cover here, and you'll often be able to win that gunfight against them if your gun is accurate enough. Next up, if you have somebody that's posted up on this area here and they're just locking you into your spawn, that's actually going to be a fairly common occurrence. What you can do is you can approach them from down low here, and we're not going to take the ladder up because they have the advantage in that fight. Instead, what we're going to do is come right to this area here, mantle up on this, and there you go. Excellent line of sight on them. They're not typically looking over in this direction here. And again, this is much better than using the ladder and trying to climb up and you're stuck using your pistol while you're on the ladder and locked in place. This is far superior for that. Now, getting into the main building, from this side, if you want to get to the top floor, you could, of course, use the ladder, which isn't ideal in my eyes. I like avoiding ladders whenever possible, and instead, I'd rather clear this area out right here, and then mantle up here, and then up like this. And oftentimes, you can flank people. If they're just chilling up here like this, and they're trying to watch this, or they're just watching the ladder, you can really easily flank them there by mantling up here, and then mantling again. Now, another thing to point out from this catwalk, you may or may not have noticed this, you can get a nice line of sight on the rooftop there, where we often have people camping in their spawn, and you've got a nice, at least 50-50 gunfight against them, which is better than standing on the ground where they have the clear height advantage. Then in that same spirit of avoiding ladders, if you're coming out of this spawn here and you want to get to the top part, instead of taking the ladder or jumping up to this area, what you can simply do is jump to this, and from here you can easily mantle up this way, which is nice. Or if you wanted to, although I don't know if I'd recommend it, you could jump across like this as well. It's just when you're mantled up, you're going to be really exposed to these people in the process of mantling. Next up, let's get into protocol. And the first spots I want to share for you guys are just a great way to approach the spawns down here. If you know enemies are spawning down in that area, instead of approaching them in the obvious ways like here, or slightly less obvious ways by flanking them there, or coming up to the top of the stairs right here where they're going to be looking for you, one great option I've got is to simply jump onto this area right here and then jump across. That's really nice, so now you have the height advantage over them. Alternatively, if you're coming through the doorway right here, obviously you want to be checking that as you're doing this, but you can jump to this little ledge, and then from here you can jump across as well, and it's just really nice to get this immediate height advantage over them. Then if you find yourself mid-map, just wanted to point out an excellent piece of cover. This one's fairly obvious, but I guess it isn't because it doesn't look like you should be able to stand on this so well. But if you're right here, this is the better way to use cover if you're challenging people here compared to challenging from this spot right here, which is exactly where they're going to expect from you. Now, going the other way, it doesn't work quite as well unless you're challenging that specific window there, unless you mantle up to this spot. And this is also a great way to lock down this door, although you are quite exposed to people that come to those windows. Now, if you find yourself on the helipad here and you have enemies spawning on that side of the map there, you could challenge from the obvious spots, which would be like from the front of the helicopter or inside the helicopter in one of these windows, but that's usually where they're looking for you. Just an alternative here is to simply go prone. You actually get a nice line of sight underneath the helicopter, and they won't typically expect you here, so you can pick off a kill or two. Now, another interesting thing is you can actually jump to this rock over here. It's not super useful most of the time, but you may be able to get like an interesting angle on somebody here that they just don't expect, because you don't usually have people looking outside of the map here. And from this rock, you can also use this as a way to flank into the spawns there. Once you are here, you can simply jump down to this ledge. You will get the countdown, but you have plenty of time to run around this way. And then you could take the ladder up to the helipad, but I prefer actually coming this way, and you'll get right in behind them as they're spawning in this area. And then finally, I just wanted to show a nice counter angle to this spot right here, where they're just going to post up here, looking at the windows, or this spot over here. If you're approaching wide and high on this side of the map here, obviously I'd use this cover here just to check to make sure nobody's coming around this corner. And then from here, you actually get a great line of sight on those people. And they're not typically looking all the way down into this area here. So usually that's just a free kill for you to pick off while getting nice cover from these people here. Now moving on, we've got Vault, and I don't have a ton of spots on Vaults, but I have a few key spots I wanted to point out, and the first one is using these right here, assuming they're not destroyed. These will get destroyed by nades, so as the match progresses, these probably won't be here for very long. But what I wanted to point out is if you dive into these and hit the dive just right, you actually land on top of it, and you may want to practice that in a custom game. It's not that easy to do, and then from here, you can actually mantle up to this area. That's really, really helpful, and a nice spot that almost nobody ever sees coming. Then when it comes to this cargo truck here, it looks like it's a bit too tall to actually mantle on top of, and if you try mantling on it from the ground, it typically doesn't work, although you can mantle from the front here. This one may seem obvious, but I found it to be quite useful as well, just because people don't typically expect you up here, and this allows you to get a bit of a height advantage on anybody there. If you are getting spawn trapped by people that are chilling back there, and you know that, maybe they just killed you and you're coming out of spawn, this is also a great way to challenge them by simply coming up here, crouching, and then strafing your way around the corner. That gives you a great advantage over them, and then also peeking around this corner right here, it's very useful to have this height advantage, and typically they're not looking up there when they're coming down these stairs. They're looking for people down here or down here. They're not looking up in this area. And then finally on this map, we have the diving board. I'm sure most of you guys are aware of this by now, but from the diving board, you actually get a huge jump height if you want to jump here. And you can actually use this to your advantage by not having to mantle at all. You can jump into the window like this, super easy, don't have to mantle, and therefore you can keep your gun up. Or of course, you can jump into this window like that. And there we go. That's going to wrap it up for the second episode of some hidden or just very useful, underappreciated or underused spots in Black Ops 6. Just a reminder, this is the second episode, so if you guys have missed the first one, in my opinion, I actually have some better spots in that video because they were my favorite spots, so make sure you check that one out. And I'm just curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How many of the spots from today's video were you unaware of before watching the video? Did you know all of them, or were there any that took you by surprise? If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.